about some birds that that and I don't know if I'm thinking kind of my dad or Ron maybe. And those of you who are younger than me, Paul Harvey, you probably don't. You have no idea who Paul Harvey is, probably. Uh, but he was the guy who did a at noon, at least here in Oregon, anyways. You could hear he had a I don't know 15-minute time of news or something. Maybe it's half an hour. I don't know. But this story of this man who had heard the Christmas story, but he was like, how could God become one of us? It just was impossible, and he couldn't believe it. So his wife wanted to go to some Christmas service, and he said, no, I'm staying home because it's just ridiculous. And so he's sitting there by the fire reading his paper, and he all of a sudden heard this thump on the window, and he heard another thump on the window, and I don't know how many thumps, but he thought, I'm going to go check this thing out. So he went outside, and it was snowing, and it was cold, and here below his window there were this bunch of birds that were there sitting, that had crashed. They had saw the light through the window, and they were trying to get inside where it was warmer. And he felt sorry for these birds, and so he said, well, I could take them out to my barn where they could be protected from the cold and the wind and the snow. And so he said, okay, so he tried to come up to them to try to get them to go to the barn, and they would just get scared and they would fly off or whatever, and it was just impossible feat for him to try to get these birds into his barn. And no matter what he tried, and he goes, boy, if I could just become a bird so that I could show them the way, so that they would not be scared of me, so that I could lead them to safety. And then I'm sure you know where the story is going. The light came on, and he said, that's what God did to mankind, so that he could become one of us, so that he could show us the way he could for eternal life. So Dad or Ron, do you remember that story? Ron's shaking his head that he remembers that story. All right. I don't remember the story. I was just told that. I was listening to something and they repeated some of it. So hopefully I got the story right. But I don't remember Paul Harvey telling me that story, though. Well, this morning I'd like to read Matthew chapter 2, and it's about the wise men. And I cannot read the story of the wise men, but to think about how the effort that they did, that they showed, that the value and importance of seeking Christ. And so I know I wasn't too original with my title here this morning, Wise Men Seek Christ. I know it's a title that is very kind of commonplace. You've heard that story, that title before. But I do want us to try in a little bit of a glimpse. You could talk a lot about how we seek Christ, but I want that message to come across of how do we seek Christ? How do we do that in our life? Okay, so I want to take some examples from the wise men. That's where I'm going to focus in on. You could go lots of different ways here on this, but that's what I want to learn from the wise men here this morning, so that we can have really a meaningful relationship with Christ. Those of you who are in the Sunday school class this morning, Bob challenged us with quite a challenge this morning of being, what kind of a church are we really supposed to be? And this week, actually, someone asked me, so what's the difference between the church that I go to, Brownsville, and the church that they went to? What's the difference between it? Well, thank you, David. I wasn't sure really what the differences were. But if we would have this purpose and vision of actually expanding, preaching the kingdom of God and making that be our priority, I think we'd be surprised at how much difference maybe that we would. And that's a challenge that, as I've been thinking about our church and what the goal, what the vision really is. What is our main priority? So I think that's something that we need to spend time praying about and seeking the Lord. And that's why I think seeking Christ, seeking God is so important. So I'm going to read the whole chapter. I'm going to spend Matthew chapter 2. I'm going to spend most of the time just in the first 11 verses, which talk about the wise men. It goes on, tells some more of the story. So I'll read the whole chapter, though, of Matthew 2. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had privately called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him, and presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted, because they are not. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and go unto the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And he arose and took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, He shall be called a Nazarene. Let's pause for prayer. Lord, I pray that you would open my eyes, open our eyes, to the wondrous things that are in your word, in your law. That we would meditate on it, that it would move us, not just to hear some good words on a Sunday morning, and then we go about and just go back and have everything the same, but that it would actually shape us and mold us more into your image, where we can proclaim the gospel message of your kingdom to our neighbors, to fellow workers, to our families, and that we would see Christ in one another's lives, and people looking on would see you. Lord, show us the way and let us walk in your ways. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Well, just like the rest of the Christmas story, there are a lot of details here that we are not told concerning the wise men. And we like to know, at least I do. And so when I read this, I go ask this question and ask this question, like, how many wise men were there? Where did they come from? Just says they came from the east. Well, that's quite a bit of large area landmass that they could have came from. And then we got, or just kind of what we expect or what we hear. We always have camels, and we always have three of all the three wise men and things like that. Well, it doesn't say that there was just three wise men. It didn't say that they rode camels or anything like that. So, but maybe they did. How long did it take them to get to Jerusalem? What was this star that somehow just seems like it was brighter or appeared or something? So how was that all? And why did this group of men and people, why did they associate this to the star of the King of the Jews? Like, how did they even know that? Well, I'm not going to be able to answer all these questions. I'm not even going to really attempt to. I'm going to make a few comments on some of the questions there. But I would like to focus in again here on the value of seeking God. And I would like us to take notice of how these wise men sought the Lord. When there's actually quite a bit of verses, particularly in Psalms, that talk about the importance of seeking God. You could look at Psalm 27:8, which says that when thou sayest this is David speaking about the Lord, seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. And another verse here in Psalm 63:1 says, O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth thee, my flesh longeth for thee, in a dry and thirsty land where no water is. Now, right now we can't imagine a land that's thirsty and dry. We got completely the opposite of that right now going on. As you came to church, I'm sure you just saw water just everywhere. So it's a little bit hard to envision what a dry and thirsty land would look like. But you can imagine, though, like how much the land itself would be thirsty for water. They crack, being able to take in all the water that they can. And so that's a little bit of a glimpse of how we are to seek the Lord. But now I want to focus in here on going back to the story here of the wise men, learning to seek God from the wise men. I have 4 points here. I was trying to get the word seek so that you could remember this a little bit easier, but I couldn't quite do that, so I got seer, like a prophet, a seer. So S-E-E-R is my 4 points. So the first one is sacrifice. So the first verse says, "Behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem." Now, this is obviously one of the questions that I mentioned earlier, and there's a lot of speculation of how long it took the wise men to get to Jerusalem. Well, when we don't even know exactly where they came from, it's a little bit hard to know. But obviously, the 2 years comes up because that's how old the babies that King Herod wanted to kill to eradicate, in hopes of eradicating Jesus, the King of the Jews. And the scriptures say that he did that according to the time of what the wise men said. So he said, we're going to kill everybody, every male child up to 2 years old. But how do we know that Herod, in his jealous rage, he seems to be, the little bit that I know of him, was kind of an eccentric man, and so he heard maybe a year or something. So just to make sure that we're going to kill Jesus, we're just going to say going up to 2 years. So we don't know if exactly it was 2 years or not. But it was quite a length of time. I'm quite sure of that. Probably definitely the consensus of people who have studied this way more than I have would have known that these men would have came from Persia or Babylon. And this definitely makes sense with the captivity of Judah being in Babylon a little over 500 years previous to this. There would still be that influence, the knowledge of God, the God of the Jews and things like that. Think of Daniel, the influence that he would have had. Think of Mordecai, think of Esther, knowing that the people knowing that they were Jewish and serving God the way they did. Daniel had prophesied in chapter 9 of verse 24, saying 70 weeks. And my understanding of that 70 weeks means 77s, or they come up with 490 years. So in 490 years, they have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of this decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And its end will come with a flood, even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. So anybody in this group of people studying these things would have taken into account this prophecy of Daniel, knowing that in sometime in this 490-year range, well, it was 62, so maybe not even quite 490 years, there was going to be this Messiah coming. So they would have known, because of their influence of Daniel and Esther and that thing, that there's going to be this possibility of this Messiah coming, because this would have fit the time of, since this decree to go back and rebuild Jerusalem, this would have been right around the time of 490 years after that when the Messiah was coming. And so this would make sense that these people would have been from Babylon or from Persia. And there's also the prophecy of Balaam, clear back in Numbers 24:17. And there's an ancient tradition there. I was reading from Henry Morris that was talking about this, that there's this tradition that Balaam was an early member, maybe even the one who started this group of the Magi. And Balaam said back in Numbers 24, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city. So if these people were from Babylon, that's around 500 to 600 miles from Jerusalem. So traveling in any size of a larger group of people, it could have easily taken 3 or 4 months. But in my readings also that I was doing this past week, there was thoughts that some of the wise men came maybe from India. Well, I'm not sure where they got from India, but if they came from India to Jerusalem is like 4,000 miles, so it could have taken quite a bit longer. So I find these speculations interesting, and I enjoy reading these kind of things. But the main point I see is that these men were willing to prioritize a large portion of time to seek for the King of Kings. And so I don't care if it was 3 months or I don't care if it was a year and 3 months. How many of us would be willing to go with, I would say, a little bit in an uncertain way just because I see a star, and so I make this connection that this is the Messiah, and so I'm going to prioritize this enough in my life that I'm going to leave my home for, again, like I said, for 2 years, for a year, I don't know, and going and do that. Are we willing to prioritize? Are we willing to sacrifice that much of our life to seek the face of God? I have to think of the people who sought after gold. What were they willing to invest? Whether it was going to California between 1848 and 1855, there was approximately 300,000 people that came to California in search of gold. They just uprooted and left. Or how about going to Dawson City, the Klondike Gold Rush, between 1896 and 1899. They just abandoned their homes, set out on a life-threatening journey across treacherous, rocky terrain. And less than half of the people actually made it to the gold fields. And actually that was 50 some years after the California gold rush, and so I don't know if it was the children or children's children, but there was actually quite a bit of people that went from California up to Dawson City. So it kind of probably runs in people's blood, maybe, I guess, a little bit. I don't know. But they were willing to sacrifice for gold. So are we willing to sacrifice our life? That maybe means that you get up at 5 a.m. to pray, to commune with God, to read His Word, to get to know what it says, to speak life into your life. Maybe that means you go find that person you mistreated 20 years ago, even if you have to travel hundreds of miles to go ask for their forgiveness and to make things right. And people may think, boy, that's strange. Why do you have to do that? But it doesn't matter. That maybe means that you abandon your prosperous job to make spreading the gospel message your number one focus. Or maybe that means you lose thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars to be a man of integrity. So what are you willing to sacrifice to seek God? Seeking God is going to look different and mean different things, but it is going to require a sacrifice. So it took months, I'm quite sure months, possibly a year or two, to sacrifice for the wise men to find Christ. So what is it in our life? The second point is that we need to be willing to entreat. And this comes from verse 2, where the wise men are willing to ask people, entreat people. Where is he that is born King of the Jews? And you may think, well, that's obvious. All they have is a star, so why aren't they going to ask for help to see if anybody else can give them direction of where they're supposed to find this King of the Jews? So it's real obvious. They needed help. And I agree with you that that is quite obvious. But I would also reply, isn't it obvious that I need help and you need help in our quest to seek God? But many times we don't see the need, or we're not willing to ask and be vulnerable enough to other people as well. But I see the wise men being willing to ask others for help. And I would just say this, to use this in conjunction with seeking God directly, but I'm convinced that God uses people though as well. Asking someone else, how has the Lord guided you? Because you might be contemplating a different occupation. You might be contemplating a different location to live in, or maybe who to marry, or maybe making some large purchase or something like that. So are we willing to go and ask, how has the Lord directed you when you have been faced with these decisions? Go ask somebody else who has already went through those things, instead of thinking, well, I'm just going to figure things out on my own. I'll pray, but I'm just going to figure things out. I'm not going to actually see how the Lord has worked in other people's lives. Or maybe we may be asked the question, does the Lord really even care about me? The psalmist David asked in Psalm 10, why do you stand afar off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? So maybe someone you know maybe a baby has died. My spouse cheated on me. My children shunned me and rejected God. I have a chronic illness or problem. Why is this happening in my life? Lord, where are you? You can be going through all these questions of why, and we can all just get all bundled up and try to say, well, I just got to figure this out on myself, instead of asking and entreating others. Does the Lord really care about me? On Friday night, the Craybills got together for Christmas, and I was talking to an individual I don't talk to a lot, and he was sharing with me things about how the Lord directed in his life. It was just so encouraging, and how the Lord provided in this situation, in this situation, in this situation. What an encouragement to me. How much better would that be if I would actually go and he was someone who was a little bit younger than me, but he's went through life too. And so how important would that be to go and, when I have struggles, to go and speak to him, speak to people that I know who have a relationship with the Lord, and treat them. Can you share with me how the Lord guided you, how the Lord helped you, how the Lord sustained you through this or that? Be willing to entreat as we are seeking God, because God can work through other people as well. And it's a concern of mine when I observe in my own life and in the lives of others that I see, that the separation that we create from other followers of God and our fellowship of believers that we want to take counsel from gets smaller and smaller, until it's really only listening to myself and maybe those people who believe exactly how I do, and have the same perspective on everything. I don't know always how to navigate through differences, but I do know that God uses people to help us find him. So let's be willing to entreat. The third point here, and that is to endure. And this is taken from verse 9, where it says, "After hearing the king, they departed." I don't know about you, but if I were one of these wise men who had been paying attention to the stars, at least we know that at least, and probably even some of the prophecies that they were acquainted with. When they get to Jerusalem, where this is supposed to be for the King of Kings, where the hub of the Jews are, and they ask people, and nobody knows really anything. So they have to go scrounging around searching for answers as well. And they finally do find that he was supposed to be born in Bethlehem. But no one was really interested even going to help them to go find this baby or anything like that. They weren't even really interested. So now we have to go search for this child in Bethlehem. How long is that going to take? To me, that would have been discouraging. And I could have easily felt like giving up. But they endured. And they just heard the king. They said, "Okay, Bethlehem, so let's go." And it says they departed. And there are going to be times when you do not feel like seeking the Lord. And I like feelings. I like to be excited. I like to that makes life just so much more exciting and interesting and easier to do things when you just are motivated to do them. But I've lived long enough to know that those feelings are not always there. Those prospectors on their way to Dawson City, they had challenges. They had snow. They had steep terrain. They were dealing with frozen tundra. They were dealing with frozen water, so they had to just sit there and wait until the water thawed out so they could be panning. They did things. I'm not even understanding how they quite all did with their machinery being able to break up the ground and stuff like that. But it was miserable. I can't imagine being up there panning for gold. But they were willing to overcome those challenges. And I know we're going to face challenges as well. The fourth one, the R, is for reverence. Verse 11 says that they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down to the ground and worshipped him. Do you realize the submitting, the surrender, the dependence, the humility that is shown by the act of kneeling? When you just bow down and in a humble state. And that's what these rulers, magi, wise men, that's what they were willing to do to this just little, no more than 2-year-old little child. And yet they had this reverence in their life of this was somebody who is great, who is above, who is worthy of all our worship. And this posture of kneeling, of reverence, speaks just a lot of reverence. And there's other ways you can have reverence to God. And how we treat him, of how we pray to him. The significance of the Christ child. This week I was listening to the radio, and I think it was, I couldn't even remember who it was for sure, but I think it was just like I don't know what to call her, the DJ of a radio station, whatever you call that person anymore. She said she was saying that she went to a seminar in regards to prayer. And this lady that was leading out in the seminar, she was from another country. And so she was the one that was teaching this about prayer. And she was sitting in the front row, and it was time to dismiss or something like that. And here this lady picked her to close this part of the service or whatever in prayer. And again, I wasn't able to write down all the words, so I'm going by memory. But she started out saying, "Dear Jesus, I just want to thank you for," and this lady that was leading just stopped her and said, "Stop! Do you know who you are praying to?" And, well, yeah. Well, then just don't say, "Just." You are speaking to the Holy of Holies. And it was really irreverent to this lady who was leading out that she would come this lightly to the throne of grace. And so she started praying again. I think she stopped her the second time as well. But this idea of reverencing God, of who He is. And I'm focusing on of the actual thing of bending the knee, of kneeling, but again, I want to be clear that that's just one aspect of how we can show reverence. I am thankful that I can drive down the road and I can pray to God, and I can talk to God just like I'm talking to my wife sitting beside me or anything like that. I'm thankful that I can lie in bed, and when I maybe can't fall asleep, and I can talk to God, and I'm just laying there, and then all of a sudden maybe I drift off to sleep. Okay, we need those types of things. Okay, I'm grateful for that. But if we never bend the knee and bow down in reverence to God and say, "God, there's something special about that. There's something," it puts us in the right perspective that, "God, you are so much greater than me. You are not only my friend, you are my friend, but you are God, though, as well." And it brings something of a reverence to our life that we need to experience as well. So enjoy those times of just fellowship where it's more of a friend to friend, but have those times of where it's in reverence, where we recognize that God is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. In Psalm 53, verse 1 says, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God." And verse 2 is this, where it says, "God looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand, that did seek God." I forget which one of the epistles, but one of the epistles says that there probably is Romans, where it says there's none righteous, and also it says there's none that seek after God. So we need God's Spirit within us to be able to seek, I believe. But how, again, I ask this question, how do we seek God? Matthew 6:33 is a very familiar verse where it says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." And I got this quote from I'm not going to pronounce this lady's name, but you can see it there at the bottom. But it says, "To seek God with your whole heart, understand that your life is no longer yours." This week, I built a small cabinet hutch type thing for our house, and I made it's not complete yet, but I made a countertop, a wood countertop for it. And I haven't really done much for putting finishes on a countertop that's going to have water and coffee and things like that, so that it can withhold, the things of moisture, so that it can last at least for a good long time. So I researched. I called someone who I knew personally that has done some of this kind of things. So I asked for his input, his advice. I watched YouTubes. I went to a store and asked their input. I looked at the products that they had to see what would be the best. And I left all the products at the store. Well, no, I did buy one just to try it out a little bit, about a little sample. And so now I need to determine what route to take. How much money do I get the most expensive? Do I get the stuff I could spend where you put one coat on and wait 24 hours or longer, and then you got to put another coat and another coat, and so it's going to be days on end of this process. So do I need to do all that, or can I just get the stuff that takes, you can wipe it on 12 more hours, you can wipe it on, and another 12 more hours, wipe it on and be done with it? Is that going to be good enough? So I'm got to find out what I should do. I look at that as seeking answers to just a pretty, really small thing of life, of having a countertop finish last, and then this value of seeking God. Am I willing to sacrifice? If we're going to seek God, it is going to cost us. And I think this quote here says it well. We have to understand that your life is no longer yours. That's a hard place to be at. And I'm wrestling with that as well, but I think it's something that you need to consider in this idea of seeking God. Are we going to entreat others? If we actually are seeking God, we're going to be willing to learn from other people. And so we're going to need to ask people how they know God. How did you go through this circumstance? Because we know people who have faced, whether it's a hard thing or whether it's decisions that they had to come to, conclusions that they came. Are we willing to go and treat those people and ask them? We're going to have to endure. If we seek God, we're going to need to do it with endurance. Because we have an enemy as a roaring lion walking about this earth, seeking whom he may devour. He's going to try to put roadblocks. I'll guarantee he's going to put roadblocks in our life. He's going to try to distract us. He's going to try to detour us on our quest to seek God. And so we're going to have to be willing to endure. And then also, are we going, as we seek God, are we going to do it in a way of reverence? If we think God is our equal or only as a friend, we are not going to find it worthwhile to continue to seek God. So as we seek God, we get to know who God is, His majesty, His glory, the joy that He can bring. We get to know what He desires for me personally. We get to know His desire for us as a whole. And so it's just, but it's going to take us seeking Him like these wise men did, who were willing to sacrifice, they were willing to entreat, they were willing to endure, and they were willing to reverence His holy name. Let's stand for dismissal prayer.